Great, thanks a lot. Well, welcome everybody. We're pretty excited to be having this town hall that's about getting involved in undergraduate research. And one of the things that we want you to understand as we go through the webinar, if you haven't joined us in one before, is that we like to make them as interactive as possible. And we want to start that right away by hearing from you so that we can understand what you're all about and make sure that we are orienting the webinar to be the most useful for you. So we have a poll here up on the screen about whether or not you've participated in undergraduate research. On the right-hand side of the screen, you should see the poll appearing, and you're able to choose one of the responses. So we'd like you to take a look at the question and think about whether or not you have participated in undergraduate research, whether you plan to, whether you're currently unsure whether or not you'd like to participate, and whether you know that you don't want to. So we're going to give you just a minute or so to think about your answer. And as we do that, we will start thinking about some of the logistic information that we need to get across. When the poll completes, you will see the answers start to appear on your screen, the results. So as many of you are starting to join us, maybe as a class or an ACM chapter individually, we do want to remind you that the webinar will be interactive, and we really do need you to fill in those polls so that we can understand who's out there since we can't actually see you. We encourage you to join via your computer or use your cell phone or tablet as a way of being able to interact with the polls that we put up. If at any point you actually have some questions, we also have the ability for you to be able to put those questions into the system through the Q&A boxes. And we will make sure that you either get answers during the webinar or directly after it. If you take a look at the slide that we have up now, it'll show you that there is a Q&A box available that will allow you to put in those questions. And as I said, either you'll be getting an answer from our speaker live during the session, or you will be getting a private response later. Just to make sure, this is what the polls actually look like. If I can get my slide to actually advance. That's the polling section that you can see down there at the right-hand side. And as the poll is still currently open, you may actually still choose a response to the question of whether or not you've participated in undergraduate research. We do want to hear from you, so please do try and make sure that you answer that. I'm sure as the poll starts to close, we'll start to see the responses coming up and find out whether or not most of our audience has, in fact, been involved in undergraduate research. I'll just wait a few seconds to see if our poll does close. I see the poll is now ended, and now you can see the responses that 59% of you have actually already participated in undergraduate research, which is fantastic. 35% of you are planning to, and 6% are not sure. So hopefully we'll either be able to give you some ideas about further ways that you can actually get involved through your undergraduate studies and help you make a decision about whether or not it's something that you want to do. So with that, let me actually move on. You've already heard a little bit about me. I want to introduce Katherine Sittig Boyd, who's currently employed by the Boston Data Group as a data analyst. Katherine is a 3-time collaborative research experience for undergraduate program participant and a 1-time distributed research experience for undergraduate, or DREU, program participant. During her undergraduate career at Simmons College, Katherine's research focused on topics ranging from computational linguistics to human gesture analysis. So that sounds really, really fascinating. With that, I want to turn it over to Katherine and learn about her experiences and why we hope to actually get all of you involved in undergraduate research.
All right. So, hello everyone. I am Katherine, and I will be talking a bit about kind of how I got into undergraduate research, what my experiences were like, who my mentors were, what I learned, what I liked, what I really did not like. So it seems that a lot of you have already participated in undergraduate research, or at least the people who entered the poll have, and that some of you are definitely planning to and kind of want to learn more. And then, of course, there are the people who are like, I'm not sure yet, right? So I think being unsure means you're already thinking about it. So hopefully this will give you a little bit more insight to what it's like and so on. So we actually have another poll for you, which is what you hope to learn from this webinar. So kind of which undergraduate research opportunities exist, how to apply for them, picking a topic, and why undergraduate research is worth pursuing. You know, that's an important question, right? There's a lot of options while you're in college. There's internships, there's research, and so on. So just kind of get an idea of what people are interested. Please answer that poll. And while you are answering that, I will talk a little bit about who I am. This is one of those things that people are always like, oh, yes, who is presenting this? So I consider myself to be a professional database wrangler. The actual title I have is data analyst, but I think it's funnier to describe myself in that way. I graduated from Simmons College earlier this year in May of 2016, and I currently live and work in Boston. And I got involved in undergraduate research when my mentor, Professor Nanette Veer from Simmons College, approached me at the midpoint of my first year and essentially said, hey, Katie, you seem to be, like, you want to get a little bit more out of your undergraduate experience than just problem sets. And I said, yes, please. And she said, well, what do you think about doing some undergraduate research next year as a team? And I said, that sounds really great, because as much as it's very fun to kind of work on problem sets, it's like there's an answer, you know, you can figure it out. And it's fun to kind of delve into something, or for me at least, I wanted to get into something I didn't know much about. So a combination of Nanette kind of cornering me and saying, would you like to do this, me being interested and wanting to go beyond the coursework I already had, kind of how I got into computer science research a bit. So I'll let the poll stay open for a bit more and address some of the topics we'll go over today. So I'll start with talking about my personal research experience, how I got involved, because the way I picked each topic was a little bit different, how you can seek out undergraduate research opportunities, and what you can do beyond undergrad, research in the real world, or just kind of how to apply anything you might learn throughout an undergraduate research experience to things like graduate school jobs, etc. So it seems, actually these answers are a bit cut off, but it seems that questions were pretty much 50-50, or not 50-50, but like split almost 4 ways. But the current forerunner is how to apply for undergraduate research programs. So we'll definitely discuss that a little bit. And we'll get into the other ones as well, which undergraduate experiences exist, and so on. So next, I'll talk a bit about my personal experience to start. So I've done CREW 3 times. I started as a sophomore and did it junior and senior year as well. And, oh, geez, there's another poll. Personal experience, I've actually done several different topics related to undergrad. So I put down this poll, which was, what are some of your computer science interests? Now, you may say, like, what I'm interested in isn't on here, or you may not actually know what you're interested in, and that's completely fine. I put these answers because I personally have experience with them, and so I can speak to them a bit. But if there's something that you're like, whoa, no, I don't really find much interest in bioinformatics, for example, that's chill. Just put E, and I just want to get an idea if any of these are of interest to you. So while that's there, in academic year 2013 to 2014, I was able to do a project on gesture analysis. And gesture analysis is kind of this really interesting field that spans studying humans and studying computers, and you're like, how do gestures relate to computer science, right? So that was one of the first questions that we as a group had and had to answer. But proxemics are very important, kind of how I'm using my hands right now as I talk. People talk with their hands a lot of the time. And so kind of applying that either to being able to analyze video to see if people are expressing something with their hands they might not otherwise be aware of, kind of body language, or even applying it to robotics. We thought there was a lot of important work to be done here. And so we kind of delved into this gesture project. So first of all, we had this issue where it's actually very hard to quantify and analyze human gestures. You kind of want to, are they in categories? What if I make a gesture that's like way over my head, if I like kind of flap my hands a little bit, if I twitch, and so on. And also, do gestures encompass things like facial expressions and shoulder shifts, or is it just hands, that sort of thing? So we got to work as a team. Nanette Veer was our mentor, and we helped implement a gesture categorization system. And so we actually categorized them in a few different ways, but we looked at 2 specifically. Discursive and representational. Discursive gestures are the kind you tend to use if you're talking. You might move your hands in a way that feels natural to you without thinking about it, although now, of course, I'm thinking about it. And representational gestures are when you're trying to kind of show something with the gesture. Like, for example, I walked across the street, or it was a piece of something that was this big, and you show a size, that sort of thing. And then we came up with an experiment wherein we had different people do different conversational tasks, and we video recorded them and found out which gestures they use in accordance with those tasks. So one of them was a storytelling task, because we predicted that you would use more discursive gestures while storytelling, and the other was a task on how to do something, as in like a step-by-step guide to something. And we figured that you would probably use representational gestures if you were trying to explain a process. The results of this research were actually presented at the Grace Hopper poster session, and that was pretty chill. It was interesting to be able to actually go and be part of a conference and talk to people about what I had done, because sometimes people have ideas that, you don't think about even though you studied this for a year. So that's pretty helpful. And I actually see this poll has come in. It seems that about half of you are interested in human-computer interactions, which is great. It's a really interesting field of study. Some are interested in high-performance computing. No one went for the bioinformatics option. Totally all right. Computational linguistics, natural language processing was also up there a bit. And a lot of you actually, not quite half, a little over a third, were interested in something else entirely. So that's great, because there's a lot of options for research. Your topic doesn't have to be limited by a certain category. So my next project was actually about conversational context. So the way you speak in different situations, we thought we might be able to predict certain scenarios that might elicit different contours in pitch. The way you speak in, for example, if you're very stressed out or if you're talking to a boss and so on. So we came up with scenarios. We wanted to apply our results to speech recognition, kind of identify if we could figure out if someone was trying to communicate a specific sentiment just through the pitch alone, not looking at the words at all. And then we wanted to see if it could actually help speech synthesis, because if you've ever heard a computer synthesized sentence or paragraph, sometimes it sounds a little bit dry. And so adding some inflection can make it sound a little more natural, and people are more likely to say, oh, yes, that sounds like a person talking, rather than a robot clearly said this. There's pros and cons, but that's one of the applications. So, for example, we had a scenario where you're helping someone do a picture search, and they've already found a bunch of animals in this search, but there's something they haven't found yet, and that's a dinosaur. And you want them to say, it's not that hard, just find the dinosaur. But in a different scenario, you might say that differently. So we had 3 different scenarios, and about 2/3 of our prompts produced the intended result. Not the best, but again, considering that language is actually similar to gesture, it's kind of difficult to quantify. It was pretty interesting. We also presented this at a couple of conferences as well. So again, really great to have that feedback. My senior year, I got to do CREW once more, and this time we branched out to natural language processing, or NLP, and we worked with clinical narratives. So if you go to the doctor and you say, doctor, I have, a pain in my leg, they'll write it down. That part of your medical record is called a narrative, and it's unstructured. So really whatever, like different doctors, some of them write in medical shorthand, some of them write in full sentences, and so on. We wanted to see if we could essentially data/text mine this corpus of records to look for discrepancies with the patient's medical history. So we worked with a corpus. So also a backup for people who are not familiar with NLP. A corpus is basically a collection of, in this case, text files that have a lot of language in them, which you can then parse out. So we had about 1,500 medical records for roughly 300 different people, and all of them had diabetes, but only 2/3 of the narratives mentioned that the patient is diabetic. So if you just looked at the narratives, you wouldn't be able to tell whether or not someone had diabetes unless there were other indicators. So we wanted to look at some of the indicators. Additionally, we wanted to see if there were discrepancies among the records. So we had about 5 records per person. We wanted to see if they, for example, mention age and gender. Some of them have discrepancies in program-based predictions for gender. So, of course, there's issues with just determining gender based on pronoun alone, but we wanted to see if, for example, someone uses primarily he pronouns throughout this series of clinical narratives, can we say, okay, this person is also a male patient? And a lot of times that did match up, but there were discrepancies as far as the prediction versus the actual data that we had. And there were 24 records that didn't mention gender at all. So there was that. And additionally, there were 320 records that didn't mention age, and 36 of them had age disagreements. So, for example, ages that weren't sequential. You're 25 on one record, and in the next, which was dated in the future, you were, say, 24, that kind of issue. We presented this at the 2016 Tapia celebration, which is a really fantastic conference. And it was, again, great to be able to discuss this sort of research with people. So moving on from CRA-W, the summer before I went into my senior year, I participated in DREU at the University of Southern California, and I got to work in a robotics lab, which was really great. And also I got to work with language and robotics. So a lot of my research had to do with language at this point, but I was kind of interested in branching out a little bit. So I actually worked in speech detection. The speech detection is a bit different from analyzing speech because you actually look at sound waves and parts of basically audio quality that determine, is this a human or is this, for example, a siren going by? And I managed to create a speech detection node in the robot operating system, or ROS, at the University of Southern California, and created this program that would essentially, given 4 different people speaking, identify who was speaking so that, for example, a robot could look at the person. I didn't do the part with the robot. I just did the part where there was a speech detection. But it was really interesting to be around a robotics lab, which I did not have at Simmons College. This was featured as a short paper at the IEEE International Symposium on Robot and Human Interactive Communication, and the authors are listed there. So that's some of my personal experience. And this is a picture of me with some robots. It's a very blurry picture. I'm sorry about that, but it was kind of fun to be able to work with these. So some challenges and successes I had during my undergraduate research career, if you will. The biggest, I think, is actually coming up with a data set. So for the clinical narratives project, we already had a data set. But for the gestures and the speech, and also and to some degree, the robotic speech detection project, we kind of had to develop these data sets on our own. So in order to get the gesture one, we had to figure out what do we want to look at, which tasks do we want, how can we quantify this, because you can't just say, well, here's a bunch of videos, analyze them. You have to determine how you're going to analyze them and that sort of thing. So that was really interesting. The other challenging bit I want to note is that it's tricky to work with data sets that aren't your own. So for the robotics speech detection project, I actually worked with a data set that someone else had collected. And so I got to work with some of the inconsistencies, what was annotated, what was not annotated, and make sure that that adapted to my own needs for student research. And then the other bit I found hard but kind of fun is translating real-world phenomena into computational ideas. So in essence, taking things that you can't always put in easily analyzable terms, like speech and gesture, into something that you can say, computer, understand this. Because as we're all fairly aware, probably, computers they know things, but they learn much more slowly than humans do, right? If you can even convince anyone of whatever. So there's that. Other things that I would consider successes would be that I got to work with robotics. That was not available at my own school for various reasons. And so to be able to go outside of what would be offered in any course and kind of be able to get this idea of a field that was very different from anything I had experienced before was really great. And I also got to contribute to the quantification of gesture and speech. So kind of just get ideas out there that, are not widely studied necessarily in the ways that I studied them. And that was pretty interesting for me. So then, okay, I had a great time. Fantastic. Why participate in undergraduate research, right? So a few reasons. Graduate school is one of the top ones. Graduate schools really like to see that you have research experience because they say, you have worked with unknown outcomes before. You've worked with data analysis. You've worked with data gathering, and so on. We know you can kind of work independently. And also, my particular take on it is that you get to do a trial run before you commit to years and years of grad school. If you think, I really want to study high-performance computing, and you study it for a year in CRA-W or a summer in DREU, and then you say, not my thing. That's good because then you haven't committed to this, 3 to 7 year graduate school experience. And also you get a sense of what you like to study. So the converse of the, high performance computing is you participate in research and you discover that you really, really love either what you signed up to do or something peripheral to it and you want to explore it more. So that's really cool. And then you'll be able to write, a more specific statement of purpose and so on. But just having a concrete idea of what you like to study and what you have experience in can really help and augment your transition from undergrad to grad school. Additionally, industry and development jobs, there's a lot of discussion about, do I go into an internship? Do I do undergraduate research? Who knows? Pros and cons to both. But if you have undergraduate research experience, it means that you actually are set up really well to approach problems that aren't solved yet in industry with a lot of flexibility. You're not kind of like, I know this can work, but how? You say, I know it can work. There's not a clear solution yet, but we can find one. And I think that's a really good kind of confidence boost or attitude to have that you develop in research. You don't know what you're doing, but you know that there might be a way to do it. Plus, you get data analysis skills. You might learn a new programming technique. I personally have learned NoSQL-related databases, which have actually helped me very much in internships and also somewhat in industry. And also, I think I would just highlight that you have a lot of comfort with this uncertainty, right? If you have to meet a deadline or if you are working with something that you're not familiar with, you can learn it quickly because you have that experience hopefully from undergraduate research. So there's that as well. Personal reasons, these are some of mine. You can get to know professors beyond the classroom. Professors in the classroom are really great, and I learn a lot from them. But being able to really get to know a professor, get to know their research background, get to know their specific expertise on what you're researching can be great. And you can also get to know professors beyond your school depending on the program you do. You can gauge your interest in various research fields, like I mentioned earlier. Build your skill set. This ranges from various data analysis skills to programming to who knows what. Plus, you get to make contributions to science, computer science. I always value this over being able to do a problem set really efficiently, but, your mileage may vary. Plus, you get a chance at conference attendance and publication. I always think this is really great. Conferences are a lot of fun. Even if you present something and you're like, wow, that maybe didn't go very well, you still probably learn something from it. There's someone out there who's maybe thinking about something that they might not have been before. You kind of get a little bit of exposure in the world. That's a lot of fun. Beyond that, going back to the kind of how do you get involved question, there's a lot of really good ways. So in order to get involved with CRA-W, we'll address the differences between CRA-W and DREU in a moment. The CRA-W is the year-long version of this. So CRA-W, you actually want to reach out to a professor at your own school. I'm actually going to go ahead in the presentation because there's a difference between CRA-W and DREU that's kind of broken down like this. DREU is the summer program. You do 10 weeks in the summer at an institution that's usually not your own, almost always. It has to do with where your mentor is. So you essentially say, hi, my name is Katherine. I'm really interested in studying language. Here's why. Here's a project I think would be interesting. And some mentor out there, a professor who's also interested in language says, I'm interested in language and this and this. And so you get matched based on that sort of thing. You get a stipend, you get living money, and it can be interdisciplinary. It can be very computer science heavy, but it varies depending on your mentor. And that deadline is actually in March. We'll get into how to apply a bit. I'm just going to go back inside. But CRA-W is the year-long one. So you do this research for a full academic year. Typically, you can also do it in the summer if you are so inclined. Typically, it's a team of people. It's at your home institution, usually with a professor there. And it's encouraged that you do this in computer science and computer engineering. But you can also definitely do a multidisciplinary project, so something that's computational linguistics, for example. Or, I worked with a psychology student on the gesture project. So she didn't have any computer science experience, but still valuable. That sort of thing. So anyway, that's a little bit more of a breakdown. So CRA-W is the full year one. So when you're committing to a full year of research, you want to first get to know your professors at your own school. Ask around who studies what. I have a professor who studies language. I have a professor who studies computer architecture, that sort of thing. Make those definitions. And then find peers who are interested in the topic. I want to make it a note that interdisciplinary projects are legitimate. So I've worked with bioinformatics students, biostatistics students, and psych students. a lot of really interesting possibility to bring in a perspective that you as a computer scientist may not know. And also some of you out there may not be computer science students. Definitely think about participating in CRA-W because it's a great way to kind of lend your expertise to a computer-related project and also learn some computer science along the way. I like to think of computational fill-in-the-blank as a great way to start brainstorming projects: computational psychology, computational linguistics, computational bio, that sort of thing. Of course, you can go a very traditional computer science route as well. The deadlines are in the spring. There's a URL here if you want to check out some more details. There's no deadline yet because, as I understand, applications are not open. But they are for DREU. So DREU is the summer one. And then think about, what are you really interested in? Genomics? Are you interested in population dynamics, security? Who knows? You can really explore research beyond your own undergraduate institution. So if you've ever said, like, oh, it's so frustrating that no one around here does HPC, maybe you can find another person out there to be your mentor to do this. So you essentially write, I'm interested in high-performance computing, and submit your application. There's, of course, more instructions at the link for mentors and students. So personal statement should focus on your research interests, which, again, if you can break it down into something really specific, that's cool. But if you're just kind of general, like, oh, I really want to do, language, great too. So we've already went over the differences here. Beyond the opportunities here, there are some NSF-funded REUs all over the U.S. There's a lot of variety in topics. There's a lot of variety in schools. Some are team projects. Some are individual, just you and your mentor. I participated in one, and I ended up with a year-long paid internship, which was pretty cool. I got to do a combination of high-performance computing and bioinformatics. Very interesting combo. I had a lot of fun, learned a lot. Deadlines are coming up in February and March. There's a URL here if you want to kind of look into them. You can also just Google NSF REU. That will turn up some good results. And there's also Conquer, which is an online resource that's provided by CRA-W for students and faculty who are interested or currently participating in undergraduate research. So this is resources, research opportunities, some exercises, and the link is right here if you're so inclined to check that out. Looks pretty interesting. And now it's time for questions. So as I understand, that's the chat section.
Yeah, please submit your questions now. Thanks, Katherine. That was like super amazing, all the stuff that you've been involved with. It's like over such a long span. So I do encourage you to put in a question. But maybe you can tell us, like, did you like having so many different kinds of experiences?
I personally did. So one reason I'm in industry right now is that in terms of going to grad school, there wasn't one, like, super interest that I want. It'll probably end up doing something with language, but I think being able to have so many varied experiences really lent itself to me kind of understanding, like, the world is very complicated. Putting it in computational terms is complicated, but it's also a lot of fun. So I personally am very happy with the variation.
That's great. So can you tell us anything about how the projects came about? Like, did you get given a team of people to just start working with, or did you come up with the ideas yourself, or how did that sort of work for the project?
Totally. So it varied by the project. So for the first project with the gestures, that was actually a team of people. There were 2 seniors and me, a sophomore at the time, and we sat down and kind of had a blank slate. And that was really great, and said, kind of study what you want. I think that would be fun for all of you. We ended up talking about all sorts of things. We thought about doing something related to biology because one of the people was a biostats major. We talked about doing something related to, I was interested in doing kind of like an epidemiology project at the time. We ended up talking about human-computer interaction, and then we ended up talking about body language, and then we thought gestures are very interesting. Annette knew someone who was working on a gesture quantification method and hadn't really tested it much because she didn't have a data set. And we went, that sounds really interesting. Gestures sound cool to us. So we as a research group decided that one. The DREU project was very much, I showed up and said, hello, and my mentor went, this is what I want you to do. And I went, that sounds great. And we figured out what the best way to do it was. So that was a little more set up, like, I need this to work so that my PhD students can work on their projects. It's something that is kind of an interim thing where it's like, not quite exactly what they're doing to the point where they should do it, but also a challenge enough for an undergrad to be able to tackle it easily. So that was kind of cool. And the clinical narratives project was very much my professor, Amber Stubbs, when, she had actually been involved in organizing the event that led to the data set. And so when, one thing I noticed as an organizer was this, we should investigate it more. And so we kind of approached it from a somewhat set standpoint there.
So was it really difficult in the project that you guys kind of met and discussed things and then figured out something to do? Was that really hard, or did it kind of just flow from the different ideas?
Well, it can be hard, and I think it varied on the project. The gesture one seemed to go very naturally. We were all very, I don't know why, but we were all really in sync. Our ideas like, oh yeah, I understand. We were all on the same wavelength. It was a really good experience. The robotics project I did, there were some difficulties where, we wanted to start out by doing a machine learning approach to it, but we didn't have enough hours of recorded data. And so we had to refactor and think about how we could approach that with the data set that we had. So that one definitely took a lot of meetings where it's like, what do I do? How do I do this with what I have so that it's still effective and meets, a 10-week deadline? So some of it was tricky. Some of it just is a matter of making sure the scope of your project is appropriate and that you're not trying to tackle too much in too short of a time. But I think that I've been very lucky to have a lot of mentors who respect the limitations of students either during the academic year or in terms of, what you can do in a summer. And it's been constructive.
Awesome. So we have another question. What do you think should be written in a personal statement or application if someone doesn't have previous research experience?
Oh, perfect. So I applied to CRA-W with no previous research experience, and it was similar to writing something for DREU where I had some but not a summer one. So what I would recommend is, first of all, think a little bit about what you want to study. You may have just the barest inkling of something, even if it's as simple as saying, I know I don't want to study some topic. Just go through, either you can look at past DREU projects and see what people have studied, or you can look at past CRA-W projects because they're all up on the website. This is basically my process went like this. Look at other people's projects and go, interesting, not my thing. That looks cool. And then kind of gauge where my interests were kind of trending and then look into that a bit more. I personally was kind of a nerd and read a lot of scholarly articles where I went, well, I'm interested in, for example, gestures. What have people written about gestures? And then write about that. I think as long as you have a genuine enthusiasm for it and you have kind of an understanding of a little bit where the field is. For example, if I were to write one right now, I would say I'm interested in studying gestures as they relate to, teaching people about concrete tasks. And say right now the research says X, Y, and Z thing. I think it would be interesting to investigate W and so on. It doesn't have to be like a project that's like, here are a bunch of statistics and a breakdown. There's actually a word limit to this, I believe, so don't do that. But kind of a sense of here's how I see myself maybe contributing to a field, if that's a helpful breakdown. It can be very broad. I think people don't realize it can be very broad.
One thing I really liked about your descriptions is none of the projects were like you sitting in a room alone. So, there was always a group that you don't have to think that you have to solve the whole problem yourself in a way, right? The collaboration is part of the fun. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what your work week was like, I guess, both in CRA and DREU. So was it lots of reading things or lots of trying things out, or?
It depended on the project. I'll talk about some of the more, I don't want to say extreme, but like distinct examples. So the gesture one, for instance, the first semester we spent learning the annotation system, which might sound a little boring, but it actually meant we got to work with this open source data set that wasn't totally open source, but it was open source for us. We looked at these academic lectures that these kind of stodgy-ish professors gave, and you're like, if I were in this lecture, I'd be asleep, but I have to pay attention to the hand movements. You would watch these hand movements and we annotated these things for hours. So a typical work week for us was like looking at gestures. What do we do? I can't stop looking at my own gestures now. Just where is the gesture starting? Where does it end? And then how do you categorize it? and kind of familiarizing ourselves with that. And then in the second part of the year, we spent most of our weeks designing the test cases, so the different scenarios we'd have people talk about. We ended up writing an experiment where we had people play solitaire and explain how to play solitaire for the representational part / the task. And we had people watch a Pixar short and then summarize it. So a lot of it was figuring out what would be best to elicit the data and so on. And we also tried the experiment ourselves to make sure we could, record it and that we would have enough time to annotate it, not so much time personally, but time in the video, that it wouldn't be like a 2-second thing and that sort of thing. And then in the clinical narratives project, we ended up doing a lot of reading because we were not as familiar with medical background as we could have been. And so we read a lot about, different medications and summaries and so on, and all of the papers that had turned out of the task that the data set had stemmed from, and kind of getting familiar with the medical side of it so that we could look at the language side of it as well. So that was a lot of reading and then a lot of programming, which was cool.
I must admit, I'm trying to keep my hands down so that you don't analyze my gestures. So when
I'm talking, I end up in the screen, so it's fine.
So when you were working on the CREW projects, how many hours per week were you dedicating them to the project while you were studying?
Right. So that's a tricky. I was able to take the class as an independent study credit, which helped. So I could have a good course load without having to be in class a lot of the time. But I ended up spending, I think it's recommended / required, you spend 10 to 15 hours a week. On the busy weeks when we were doing analysis close to the end, it was maybe more like 15 to 20. But I never found that it interfered with my coursework a lot, mostly because I made sure to carve time out for it. I'd say, I have to do classwork, and then I really get to do this fun project. So for me, I got to do something I really liked for credit, and it didn't really feel like it was a job so much as it was just really fun. But about, I almost fell out of my chair, 10 to 15 hours.
I was hoping there wasn't an earthquake in Boston.
No, that would be terrible.
So about 10 to 15 hours. And how did you choose which projects and advisors to work with?
So Simmons has 3 computer science professors, 4 now. And so it was kind of a who's around to do undergraduate research. And Nanette has traditionally done a lot of research mentoring. And so she, on account of reaching out to me, became my mentor for that project. I really had fun working with her, and we had a lot of questions that we kind of wanted to address in a separate project, so that was the second year. The third year, I was interested in doing not computational linguistics, natural language processing, so something more text-based, something very language rulesy, and that was Amber Stubbs' department, and so that's how I ended up meeting up with her. As far as DREU, that was all the DREU mentor matching process.
So it was kind of out of your hands in a way, right?
It was a little bit. Now, granted, you can kind of look at which professors have mentored in DREU before, and you can technically tailor a personal statement, but there's no guarantee. I actually applied for DREU twice and got in both times, but I only participated in it once. I ended up finding a different, sorry, bad to say, I guess, I don't know. But they were both similar personal statements, but very different professors in very different labs. So it's a little bit out of my hands. But in a good way. I might not have reached out to those professors. Sorry.
Another question that's come in is, what course background did you have when you asked to get involved in research? And what courses do you think were most useful?
That's a really great question. So when I was asked to participate, and I make the note that I was reached out to rather than me doing the reaching out. That may not be the case for everyone. When I was a first year, I had C++ in high school and a Python course in college. By the time I actually did research, I had Python and Java as intro programming, object-oriented programming, and so on. And then while I was in CREW, the first year I did it as a sophomore, I was also in kind of computer organization and architecture and a few other classes that I can't recall, but I had very little programming experience, and that was fine. By the time I got to my first summer undergraduate research experience, I had a few semesters of programming. I had data structures, which I think I will personally, proclaim my love for data structures from the rooftops. I think that for me has been one of the most helpful classes I've ever taken. It really helps you conceptualize how you can maybe navigate and analyze different information in really creative ways, and it just gives you a very good basis for computer science in pretty much all forms. So a programming language or two, data structures if you can. If you're going to do something web-related, that's good. If you're going to do something high-performance computing-related, having operating systems is very helpful, and having Linux experience often is very helpful. But I got by without it, and I learned on the fly. So
that's actually kind of a nice segue to a question from Daphne. She writes,
thank you, Daphne.
Starting research as a freshman would have been great, but her university is small with limited opportunities. So would you recommend that a student get involved in research that they might not actually be interested in, just so that they can gain research experience in general?
So I would say that as someone who has done research that I was not always the most interested in, not during CRA-W, but during one of my summer projects, I did not like it very much, but I learned a ton from it. So if you can stay focused on something that you don't like or that you don't love to go into and study every day, I say go for it because it was very valuable for me, but it does come down to personal decisions. There are some things that I would not want to do for a year. That said, if there's not a lot of research opportunities, definitely worthwhile to kind of reach out to the ones that you can have if you think that you're interested in doing research in any capacity. So even though I wasn't interested in doing high-performance computing, I ended up in a high-performance computing laboratory and learned a ton. Half of how I know how to navigate a given operating system is from that experience. I really found it valuable. I also kind of never want to do it again. So,
well, yes, sometimes research experiences are a great way to find out, kind of hone in on our interests too, right? By finding out
definitely.
So yeah, totally agree. Well, I super want to thank you for the presentation. I think we had a lot of energy, and I think the range of experiences you had as an undergraduate are really pretty phenomenal. So I think it gives a sense of folks of what they might be able to achieve during their undergraduate career. Before we move to the chat forum, I do want to make sure that that everyone knows who's on the webinar that we do have a survey available. The survey URL is up there on the screen, but you'll also be sent it, so you can make sure that we will try and reach out to you. It's very, very important for us that you do fill in the survey so we can make the webinar series appropriate for our audience, and also so that we can understand more about the areas in which people are interested in learning more and be able to just hone all of the things that CRA-W does to try to improve the research opportunities for undergraduates, graduate students, and beyond. So we really do hope that you've enjoyed this virtual town hall. We do want to continue the conversation. So after the webinar switches off, it will switch into a chat forum. And I know that Katherine's going to stay on, I think, for about a half an hour, and other people will be on, so that we can have a conversation about questions you might not have already asked. And we'd like to hear about you. We'd like to hear about what kind of research you're currently working on, where you want to go with it, what kinds of things you'd like to be interested in. There'll be people on the chat that might be able to provide resources or areas of ways to get involved in particular directions that you're interested in. So we'd really like to continue the great discussion about undergraduate research. So with that, the webinar is officially closed. We'll move to the chat forum, and we're really thrilled that Katherine was able to join us today. So thanks again.
Thank you for coming.